Awesome to have Roger online. Roger, where are you? Are you in Bali at the moment, or whereabouts are you exactly?
Yeah, I'm in Bali at the moment.
Wow. So it's 1 a.m. in the morning, and one of the things I always enjoy about this technology is you're getting people from all over the world. But thank you very much for coming online so early in the morning, literally 1 a.m. So it's it's fantastic to have you here.
Well, it's good to be here as well. So, looking forward to this call.
So what we're going to do is I just want to give a quick intro and just explain a couple of things, and then I've got a number of questions that I'm fascinated in, and you and I actually did a webinar similar to this about a year ago, so I'm fascinated to see how some of those trends have changed. But something I'm probably more excited about is that, I had the privilege of coming out to your, entrepreneur resort in Bali, well, a couple of times actually, and more than 2 years ago we spoke about your vision and your dream of opening up entrepreneur resorts around the world and ultimately allowing people to participate. And you were the one that got me onto crowdfunding right in the start. So, but I'll get onto that all a little bit later. But if people really want to, we're going to share with you tonight something that's never been done before, and it really is quite exciting. Just a little bit about Roger. I think if you don't know who he is, I would highly recommend reading this book, The Millionaire Master Plan. You can get it on Audible and buy it online. And really, for me, the journey started back in 2010. I was actually invited to present at one of Roger's events, and I kind of went along as a speaker, I suppose you would call it that, and was so intrigued by what I learned. And really, it was all based on this framework, which was the Wealth Dynamics framework. And for anyone that wants to be an entrepreneur, most people will be in the environment where they think to themselves, they've got to be able to do it all. And most people don't really realize what they need to do, and most importantly, they don't understand what their formula is. And I remember sitting there, and there were two memories that I'll never ever get out of my head. One was Roger going through these 8 different profiles, and very specifically, there's no right and there's no wrong to which profile you actually are. But when you understand what profile you actually are, it makes your life so much easier. And the second thing I'll never forget is that Roger then took his business card and said that anyone that's a creator, which is this person up the top, should tear up their business card if their name says CEO on it. And I still haven't quite figured that one out because I'm 7 years later. My name still says CEO on it. So got to somehow figure that one out. But I've never ever forgotten that comment that you had. And just a couple of things that I think are relevant to people is that when I first understood this, I started my first business in 2004. Before that, I had a number of kind of property development opportunities, but a proper business in 2004 with actual staff and people. And I worked really, really hard, and we had a team, not a huge team. I think we probably got to no more than 15 people, but it felt like you were trying to do everything. And for me, what was really interesting is that we tended to have people that could do stuff, but weren't necessarily at another level in terms of management and leadership. And I remember when I sat there in that venue back in 2010, and Roger explained this whole thing, and I'm not going to go into detail tonight, but there's 8 profiles, and what I love about it is it's really easy. You've got a creator, which is Richard Branson. You've got a star, that's Oprah Winfrey. You've got a supporter, that is Jack Welch, one of the best CEOs of the 20th century. You've got a deal maker, Donald Trump. You've got the trader, who's this? Is this Soros? George Soros. We've got Warren Buffett, the accumulator. We've got Mittal, the steel guy, and we've got the Facebook, genius in terms of the mechanic. Now, I would highly, highly recommend that you go and do some research on this. If you're an entrepreneur and or a budding entrepreneur, this will really make a big difference in your life. And there were 3 major things that happened to me. One was the moment I understood the challenge. I remember standing and I was getting coaching from Roger, and he literally explained what I needed to do to get the right person into the business. And I remember standing there, and I remember thinking I knew exactly who that person was, and it was Jaco Maritz. And it took me another 3 years to persuade Jaco to actually join our team, and quite frankly, for me to get brave enough to be able to pay him a decent enough salary, because when you're an entrepreneur, you never have any money, and you always say that you can't afford to get people. But the moment that Jaco arrived, it really allowed me to take IPS to another level, and ultimately to really grow Wealth Migrate, which is one of the things that we'll talk about tonight. The second thing was, you challenged me in those days. I remember about writing a book, and I remember saying to you, I'm never ever going to write a book. It's a flipping waste of time, because by the time you've written it, it never actually, it's out of date already. And I'll never forget you saying to me, well, what you need to do is you need to get someone that ultimately is like a coach, and basically you need to get I can't remember what you called it, a publicist or whatever it is. And I remember doing it, and today I have the book, and it came out in 2014, and I wouldn't recommend anyone writes a book if they want to make money out of writing a book, but I would recommend it as a significant way to really be able to, as a business card and from a credibility perspective. And the third thing for me, which was amazing back in 1998, was that I wrote my dissertation on how technology was going to change property. Back in the early 2000s, I was trying to figure out how we could get people in London to buy property together. Then we had the crash in 2008, and there was just such an opportunity to buy whole buildings in London. But I had to get all the investors to come together, and I just couldn't do it. And I really thought to myself, I didn't know what the word platform was in those days. But I'll never forget on one of the coaching calls that I did with Roger, where he really said to me, right, now is the time that you need to focus on crowdfunding. And I remember back in 2009, I'd met Henny, and I'd given him the whole proposal of Wealth Migrate, and quite frankly, it didn't have the word crowdfunding in it, but that's exactly what it really was. And I remember going to Henny in 2010 and going, Henny, now's the time. Like I'm starting. Like there's a worldwide trend going in the right direction here, and we need to get started right now. And I actually took your voice recording, Roger, and played it for Henny, so in case he thought I was crazy. I think he still thinks I'm crazy, but anyway, that's a separate conversation. So I just wanted to kind of give a little bit of a heads up to who Roger is, and just, those are just three of the very small, well, no, not very small, three of the more material impacts that you had early on when I met you. Subsequently, as I've said, I've had the privilege of coming out to Bali many times. And for anyone that wants to be an entrepreneur, if anyone that wants to get better at being an entrepreneur, and most importantly, for anyone that's an entrepreneur, but a person that is running their business, and even though they think they've got a business, they're kind of a one-man band that's doing everything. I cannot recommend Roger more highly to go and learn from him, and all the trends and events. And I don't know if you've got an event in South Africa, Roger. I know that you've have them around the world. I don't know when your next one is. Normally it's about October, normally in South Africa. But for me, I just can't recommend this enough. What's that? Yeah. Sorry.
December this year.
Oh, December this year.
Yeah.
So what? Just in terms of the best website to find it, is it just wealthdynamics.com, or where's the best place?
Best place for the event is Fast Forward Summit. It's fastforwardsummit.com.
Okay, great. Okay, and then I'm gonna move into some questions. I just wanted to kind of set a bit of a framework so people understood who you are. The one last thing I would say before I move on is that I'll never forget that one of my goals in life was to meet Richard Branson, and I did that in, I don't know what year it was. And when I say I met him, I literally shook his hand for about 3 seconds. And then I'll never forget sitting there watching a video once, and Roger sent it from Necker Island, and I was like, oh my word, is that even possible? You can actually go to his private island and spend time with him. And I was very kind that you actually helped me get invited to that group. And I couldn't go the next year, but I actually went the following year. So 2015 was my first year. I managed to go. You were actually there with Hilda. It was an incredible experience. And I was actually back last year. And again, credit to you. One of the people I respect most on the planet, I've got to spend 2 full weeks with, which was absolutely phenomenal. So I'm very, very grateful for that. But tonight's not about that. Tonight for me was just trying to set a bit of a framework, and I wanted to explain to people the type of impact that Roger's had in my life. And as I understand it, over 250,000 entrepreneurs have done this test, and literally hundreds of thousands of people would have similar stories to myself. But really the value that I've learned from Roger is that he spends his life looking around the world at large trends and what is happening around the world, and then taking very complicated and confusing concepts and actually making them pretty easy for people to understand. So again, this whole wealth dynamics thing, I'm not going to try and explain it tonight, but most people understand profiling, and it's very, very complicated, and yet Roger made it easy for people to understand and be able to implement. And so tonight, I really wanted to get into just some of the trends around what is actually happening in the world. And one of the questions that I get asked a lot, and I'd love your kind of thought process on this, Roger, but what do you think is a global citizen? You get to travel all over the world, and you live in Bali, which most people would dream about. What to you is a global citizen?
To me, a global citizen is someone who can work from anywhere and who can learn from everywhere. And so it's a really important thing that there's got to be that ability, not just to see the whole world as your home, which can only happen if you've actually got the financial freedom and the travel freedom and time freedom to be able to really go anywhere, but you've also got a global mindset, because I think there's a lot of people that actually, create their wealth in a particular country, but they still feel locked into that country because it's far more than just what your assets are or what your means are to be able to actually think globally. I mean, if you don't have the means to think globally, it's actually very difficult to do it because you can't even visit other countries. But if you do have the means to do it, it doesn't mean you're a global citizen, because if you're not actually having a global mindset, you can be traveling around the world, as we see a lot of nations do, and not actually supporting people in other countries as well. When you do, then you can be someone who can travel to Africa, someone travels to India, travels to parts around the world where you can see that you can be of value, or even travel to America and see you can be of value as well. So for me, that's what a global citizen is someone who can work from anywhere and learns from everywhere.
How did you? I mean, you've got a very interesting history. If I remember rightly, born in Hong Kong, studied at Cambridge University in England, and obviously have had business in Singapore and now live in Bali, and obviously now you've got businesses, around the world. What was your journey? What if you could give someone kind of one key, what would it be in terms of to making that shift to being a global citizen?
I have parents that can't sit still. my parents basically moved every couple of years, so I was kind of lucky. I think how you are brought up, you see a lot of people who do travel around with their families, and that makes life a lot easier. If you don't have that, and that you haven't had the opportunity to do that because you've been in one country most of your life, then it is getting around a group of people that are thinking in that way, because it's impossible to just go out and try and do it on your own, but you have to surround yourself with the right environment, the right community to be part of it. So if you're not part of a community, then become part of one. I mean, that's what you've done, right? I mean, it's like you connected with people overseas into other groups, and then that gives you an unfair advantage. It allows you to bring other ideas from other countries, like the way you're bringing crowdfunding into South Africa. It allows you to be one step ahead. And I see traveling very much like time traveling, because when you go to a place like America, America's ahead of a place like South Africa in some areas, but South Africa is also ahead of some other places around the world, which includes America when it comes to thinking differently about resources, for example. Whereas if you go to China, then you're going to be actually coming from the future about other areas, like, for example, scale, right? Like, China has a whole different sense of scale compared to America even. So understanding that, you suddenly realize, wow, you can actually it's actually easier today to start a global business than it is to start a local one. So if you're around the right people that get that and understand that, then you can see those trends and you can see those opportunities far more easily.
It's interesting, just before we move on to the next question, a personal story there, and I actually did an interview with her 2 weeks ago. People wanted me to share that with her, but it's a young lady by the name of, she's 27 years old, Kate, who's a South African, but her and her boyfriend wanted to go and experience overseas, so they took an opportunity with Wealth Migrate to move to our Shanghai office, and it's just amazing how she's changed in a year. I mean, exactly what you're talking about. She's gone from being a local South African to being that proverbial global citizen. And I mean, China blows me away every single time I go there. And I'll be quite honest, I'm quite envious of them, being in that environment and literally, learning it on a day-to-day basis. So it's actually exactly what you say. I think if anyone is young enough or certainly can move, being able to live in foreign countries is one of the best things you can ever do. Just in terms of the next question, if you look, and one of the things that I've enjoyed most, and just for people to understand, the Fast Forward Your events that Roger does a world tour on is the biggest trends that are happening around the world, and it's really, really important. If you want to be successful in life, you've got to understand the big trends. You can't be trying to sell Volkswagens and get in the best sales coach and the best marketing coach and figure out that Volkswagens are still not working. You've really got to be able to follow the big trends. But I know you've got a whole seminar that I would highly recommend that people go to in terms of Fast Forward. But what are just some of the top trends that you're seeing that are going to change people's lives, in the short to medium term?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just give three real quick ones, which would be relevant to everyone watching, because I know many who are watching are interested in investments, obviously interested in property crowdfunding. So these are three which really link to that. The first one is and this is not about the obvious thing people are hearing about around automation or artificial intelligence or all these other things. You'll hear the buzzwords. I want to talk about the trends about how it impacts us personally. So the first one is this shift that's happened in our own in our own intellect or our own IQ, where we went from this idea of being book smart, which means it's all about your academic knowledge, to street smart, which really happened maybe about 25 years ago when entrepreneurs started showing up, where it became really clear that just going out and getting a degree does not mean you're going to be successful, but actually getting out there and having experience is what makes the difference. And we're actually seeing this massive shift right now, going from street smart to silicon smart, because street smart means that you go out and get the experience, but you can go out and get experience today, which includes in something like property investing, and you'll be beaten by some 20-year-old tomorrow simply because they actually have a better grasp of technology, of data, of understanding how to see to customer habits, where to find tenants, where to get investment in a totally different, understanding Bitcoin in a totally different way, and so it doesn't even matter if you actually think you know how to go about doing something, you'll be out of date straight away. So that's a really, really important thing. It doesn't mean everyone has to be silicon smart. It means you have to have a team that's silicon smart. So you have to have the right people on the team that actually can use technology in a way that actually makes you much smarter than if you're just trying to figure it out for yourself. So that's the number one, which is really important. And obviously, getting into a network, whether it's Wealth Migrate, whether it's other networks that are using data, is super important. There's a second part, which I think is really important, which is this massive shift. So that, first of all, what does that mean? That means there's this massive shift in the workforce. The people who aren't doing that, they end up out of jobs, they end up fearful about not having any money. The ones who understand that are the ones who can keep on multiplying again and again because it's a different world we live in. The second one is the revolution and disruption, not in the workforce, but in education itself. And the second one I think is really important, is the speed and the acceleration of certain groups within society to be learning at an exponential rate. So this is something called learning networks, and it's brand new, but everyone can kind of see it happen. So for example, if you look at something like YouTube and you look at kids skateboarding, right? Perfect example of where you take how much did kids who are skateboarding innovate over the last 30 or 40 years? Not so much. And then suddenly, in the last couple of years, it's gone exponential. Take something like kite surfing. It's the same thing, right? It's like only so much happens, and suddenly the technology, everything takes off. And the reason is because everyone's sharing all the very latest best practices with each other on video. So if someone does a new trick, if someone has a new idea, then everyone gets that new idea at the same time, and then you build on it, as opposed to everyone trying to learn on their own. So this idea of a learning network where you're actually able to find the very best learning, very different from a social network, which is where you get the biggest conversation. Here's where you get the biggest learning. So, where social conversations or social networks create lots of noise, learning networks creates huge amounts of progress. So we see that happen in, let's say, for example, crowdfunding. In crowdfunding, you can go to Kickstarter or Indiegogo, and you can see what are the ones, what are the projects that are actually making the millions. And immediately, as a result of that, you can see what they're doing different, or what's the kind of returns people are getting, which is why they're so successful. And then you can replicate that. The same is now happening within entrepreneurship. It's happening with our network, with what we do in GeniusU. It's what you're doing right now with like webinars and so on. Everyone gets the top knowledge at the same time. Then they can apply it, and then they can then go and share, here's what we did and how we did. And that's super important. The ones who aren't part of those exponential networks, like if you're sitting in a class waiting for the teacher to teach you, you'll be out of date before you know it, right? So we've gone from the teaching teacher to the leading learner, and the leading learner is where whoever's the one leading the learning is the one who's actually at the top of the field, and anyone can be the leading learner tomorrow. If someone has a better model, like we're going to talk about a model today, then suddenly everyone goes, that's a brilliant model, and everyone goes down that route to do that, right? So that's the second one, and I want to share a third one. I'll just real quick, because the third one is about assets themselves and liquidity, and the link between the growth in liquidity and also at the same time the reduction in risk at an exponential rate that's currently taking place at the next level of asset class after companies, right? So if you go back to the 1980s, there was this massive shift where we could suddenly invest in any company on any stock exchange anywhere in the world, right? And when that happened, then suddenly everybody realized that you didn't have to have a broker, you didn't have to go and understand the whole company and get all the legals. You can go directly straight into the trading exchange. It's where companies, straight away, like E-Trade started taking off. It's when Bloomberg took off, and suddenly, as long as you had that data, as long as you had the right information, as long as you had like $1,000 to go into something, you could then invest in Apple, you could invest in Sony. That's now happening within property. The same thing's happening. So, for example, today the fastest growing property company in the world is WeWork. It's basically a co-working company. It's gone from $0 to $20 billion within a matter of years. Someone went and copied WeWork in China and they called it Your Work, like URWORK thing. We'll just copy it instead of We Work, we'll call it Your Work. It became worth $1 billion within 1 year. And they don't even own any property. What they own is the cash flow from the property. So that's true liquidity, the way they're doing that. So we're seeing that happen right now, and people are bypassing even currencies to do it. Bitcoin just went over $1,700. Bitcoin 4 days ago became worth more than gold for 1 Bitcoin to 1 ounce of gold. It's now basically just gone up by another $200. And that's because there's this demand from people to have liquidity in a very different way, which isn't, basically restricted by borders or restricted by countries. So we're seeing that. The most valuable private company in the world outside of Uber is Airbnb. Airbnb is a property company which doesn't own any property. So it's the same basic concept, which is that if you own the actual cash flow, you don't have to own the asset, and you can actually at the same time be worth far more than the asset value. And that's something that a lot of people who are in property, a lot of people who are investing the slow way don't understand how that works or why that works. That comes right back to the first two. Make sure that you're silicon smart, make sure that you're in a learning network where you're understanding these things, because you will be left behind otherwise.
Well, look, I mean, that's just one thing. I had the privilege of coming to Tau at the end of last year, and we were going to show people about that just now. But you were talking a lot about these different trends, and I mean, even around that asset and liquidity and everything. I mean, it was absolutely fascinating, and I highly recommend people, dive deeper into this. You spoke about learning networks. This is Genius U for people that want to go in and be part of effectively a learning network where they can go and learn from others and share, etc. So this is one of the creations that Roger and their team have been behind. Just tell us a little bit about this, Roger, before I move on, because I think it's just important if you just give a précis as to what this is.
So the way that this works is, for example, if you click Scott on up on the top of the dashboard where you've got your name there, when you go to something like Facebook, you'll see that the one next to the dashboard, you've got your name, Scott. Just click on Scott in your profile, right? So what's really important is that if you maybe you haven't even done it yet. Actually, you got your little question. It's okay. Click on your name instead of your photo, right? Because this should take you to your profile. If you have completed some of the parts in your profile, you'll find that you actually know what your genius is, what your purpose is. You'll find what your who your connections are within business. So this is like an entrepreneur network. So here, for example, it shows you you're a creator, which means that basically, you're like a Richard Branson. When you then click on that, you can see all the other people who are the same as you. So you can find the right people to actually build your team with. You can find the right people to align with. And so it's effectively an entrepreneur network where everyone learns from each other. And if you see on the right-hand side where it says the suggested part up the top, the menu at the top, if you actually click on any one of those are all circles that are linked to United Nations global goals, which means that basically, if you're saying like, well, my purpose is quality education, or my purpose, there's 17 global goals that United Nations are saying are the biggest global challenges, and they've set those goals, and entrepreneurs are now reorganizing themselves together to connect to them. So here you can actually find entrepreneurs all over the world. We have about 600,000 entrepreneurs on here. We have about 1,000 new entrepreneurs a day who are joining it, and then you can connect with others around the world, learn collectively together. So it is a learning network, and at the same time, you're then actually able to connect opportunities together as well. And we're going to link this entire network together with Wealth Migrate, so people can see their dashboard on Wealth Migrate alongside their dashboard on Genius U of the people they know and the people that they want to work with.
It's really exciting. I mean, when you talk about these learning networks, it's I must admit, I've got to be careful of the time, because whenever I talk to you, I can talk for hours. But just a quick question. Why do you live in Bali? A lot of people, it's interesting because you're sitting in Bali and I'm sitting in Knysna right now, two places that most people would say it's not possible to run a global business from, and yet both of us do it. Why do you live in Bali?
The number one reason is environment. And what I mean by environment is that we as human beings are not actually meant to be stuck in a box all day. And I think anyone who actually has an experience of walking through a park or taking time out and getting in nature just realizes how much it changes your state of mind. It's actually very difficult to get stressed in nature. I guess unless you're walking through a safari with a lion looking at you, but actually when it comes to nature generally, it actually allows you to get into far more flow. So I find, and this had a lot more to do not just with me, but our entire family, I find that when you're with the people you love in an environment which actually brings out the best in you, or what it allows you to do also in terms of your quality of thinking, in terms of your dreams, your ability to get on well with people, all of those different things. You know, you don't get road rage when you're sitting on a beach, right? So understanding that we really are the product of our environment, then choose the right environments which allows you to be like that is why we're actually now rolling out beach clubs and resorts around the world for entrepreneurs. Is because when we see entrepreneurs get connected to an environment which actually brings out the best in them, what they can then do in terms of their leadership qualities, in terms of their innovation for their business is off the charts compared to them trying to figure it all out when they're stuck in the city. So that's really the big reason why, and it's always going to be that way, because I found that again and again. Very few people, if they go into paradise, ever want to go back. The only reason in the past that people would go into paradise and then say this is just a 2-week holiday is connectivity. I mean, there was just no easy way to get connected to their office, and they had to go back to the office to find out what's happening. But we live in a world today where the internet and all the tools and systems that we have actually make it easier for you to be able to separate yourself from your day-to-day activity and busyness and actually do a better job looking after your business from a distance than if you're actually sitting in the office every day with all the disruption and all the distraction that happens.
Well, I mean, to that point, I was playing soccer on the beach with my son an hour and a half ago, and we got there by boat and are back in time, showered and ready for the webinar. So it's amazing. There's a question here, and Ashraf actually asked the question, but it pretty much ties in with my question, is how have you built a global company? So, and Ashraf asked a very similar question. What is, how do you do it? And you mentioned already that it's easier to build a global one than a local one. But, what are kind of one or two of the tips that you've done to be able to do it?
Well, I mean, you mentioned Richard Branson earlier. I really like what Richard Branson says when he's asked that same question, right? It's like, what is the trick or what's the formula, given that he's done it many, many times with different companies? What's the formula you follow? And he basically says, well, there's 3 things. He says that, number 1 thing is go out, find great people, right? Second thing is equip them with all the tools that will allow them to succeed, right? And the third one is get out of the way. That's it, just those 3 things. And it's so true. It's so simple, but it's so true. It definitely starts with the people. You can have all the best systems in the world, the best idea in the world, but if you don't have the best team or the right team, it's not going to work. And if you're able to attract the right people, and how do you attract the right people? It isn't by paying them the most money. It's by having the biggest vision, one that they can co-create with. But if you actually then have that and you have a purpose-driven enterprise that people really want to work with, and you attract the right people, then make sure that they don't end up falling over because you are thinking too small, or you're not giving them the right systems, or you're not giving them the right resources to succeed. Make sure all those things are in place, and then absolutely get out of the way. Which is the good news. It means you can actually get onto other things. As Richard Branson again says, he says people always want to see the most important person in the building. So if you want to actually have time freedom, the first thing to do is get out of the building. And I think that's really important as well, is that whole aspect of actually allowing people to get on with the job that you've actually got them in for. It's easier said than done. But if you're committed to that process, then you find out the ways how to do it, and you find the people that already know it, and they can mentor you to help you on the way as well.
He did. I heard him, give that advice in 2015 when you and I were there. And when I came back in 2016, I added a 4th one that he probably said it, I just didn't hear it. But there's a big difference between delegation and where you just kind of drop someone in the deep end and they drown. And he said also create feedback loops to be able to listen,
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's really important as well, that rhythm. For example, with all our teams and all of our different companies, we have a weekly rhythm, a monthly rhythm, and it makes life very easy that everyone just knows when they can check in. People aren't disturbing each other all the time, and we can really see all our metrics, everything online very easily as well. So we have dashboards for everything.
You'll be laughing at me, but Michiel and I were having a meeting yesterday, and I was reminding him of how you taught us to do dashboards just yesterday. So how do you manage risk within this changing environment? It probably leads in with what you just said.
Yeah. Well, I mean, really, risk comes down to one thing, which is rhythm. I think this is so important, and what I mean by rhythm is frequency of rhythm. So, like for anyone, if you're checking in on where you're at, if you're flying a plane and you're checking on the dash every 5 hours, you can be pretty sure you're going to be off course at the wrong altitude. I mean, like everything, because you're just not checking in often enough, and there's a frequency of that rhythm in terms of check-in, and also in terms of changing. So if you need to change something quickly, you can, and you've got the flexibility to do it. When it comes to capital, like risk of capital, that's liquidity, right? And it's like if you're saying, well, how do I manage my risk in a volatile market? The answer is liquidity. Have liquidity, so if you need to get out, you can get out easily. And that's the challenge with some of the higher yielding assets like property up until now, is that generally higher returns required high risk. That's not the case anymore. You can get higher returns with very low risk simply because you're able to share in returns with much higher liquidity and much lower quantum, right? Which basically, is the whole principle is don't risk more than you can afford to lose, and don't risk for a longer period of time than you can afford to keep it there for.
Yep, no, 100%. So if we look, in terms of, this is probably one, and these it's almost like you intuitively are answering these questions. This book has recently come out from Tony Robbins, and he talks a lot about kind of what wealthy people do, and there's a lot of really great strategies in there that I would recommend people read, but one of them is diversification. But for you, what distinguishes wealthy people from the rest in terms of the people you've met?
I think it's really important for people to get to the core of capital and understanding how wealth relates to capital. So, and the reason I say that is because, we've gone through this massive 100-year cycle of what I call the capitalization of democracy. A lot of people think that, democratic countries and capitalist countries are the same thing. They're not, but they are linked in that democracy is your ability and your freedom to choose. Capital is your ability to value your future, right? So when you capitalize a business or when you capitalize a property, it's someone saying, I'm buying the future cash flows of that. So effectively you're saying, I'm not just taking a bucket from the river, I own the river now. And so there's a value to that river because I get all the buckets out of it. So that's a really important notion, is that capital is your future value. Now, the reason that that's really important is because there's 3 different types of capital. And if you think about this like an iceberg, the 2 most important types of capital are the ones that wealthy people focus at, whereas poor people tend to focus at the 3rd type. The 3rd type is financial capital. So believe it or not, poor people or people that do not have a wealthy mindset actually worry much more about money than wealthy people do. Because the wealthy people are building 2 other things as capital, which allow the iceberg to grow, where the financial capital comes on top. And those 2 types of capital is social capital and intellectual capital. And you can actually build social capital and intellectual capital for free, just with your time. And then, of course, the money just comes. So social capital is about your connections. It's about who you know. It's about spending time with the people out there that actually have the opportunities, have the knowledge. Intellectual capital is being able to set up your businesses, to be able to set up the entities, and even have the IP, have the branding, have the know-how to actually make things happen. And if you actually invest time in just building these 2, it's just a matter of time before the financial capital basically matches those 2 as well. Whereas with someone who is not wealthy, they're not spending much time at all building their knowledge, building their intellectual capital. They're not spending much time at all on their social capital. They're just chasing the financial capital, which means they're renting their time out with a job or trying to grab it from someone else who's built the other 2. And that's the tragedy of it, because we actually spend 18 years of our lives, generally 15 to 18 years, in education, where the amount of social capital and intellectual capital we build is almost 0. Because we're actually learning things that aren't relevant anymore, and we're not connecting to the people we need to be connecting with, which is why so many people leave school and then they're stuck. So that's what the wealthy people do. The most wealthy people today do one more step, which is realize that we've gone from an era which was effectively the capitalization of democracy, and we've now shifted to an entirely new era, which is the opposite. It's not the capitalization of democracy, it's the democratization of capital. That's a big word, but it's really important. The democratization of capital is when you realize that the value of that building or the value of that property or the value of that company can now be democratized across multiple people, which means that you don't have that same need to own the whole thing anymore. It's like Uber with cars. Like Uber doesn't have to own any cars, but because they own the cash flow, they're able to become a multi-billion-dollar business. And so that's a really important distinction. The wealthiest people, they've made that shift. They're not trying to hold on to the capital themselves. They're sharing it with others, and they're actually realizing that if they have a smaller amount of a faster growing asset, it's going to be a whole lot better than 100% of something that's not growing much at all.
Yeah, no, that's an awesome distinction. When you look at it, what is the most important thing? And I think maybe I can skip this one because you've actually answered it from a global citizen perspective, but really, it's what you said about being able to learn globally. But if you would say there's one thing that's the most important thing to be, have that global mindset?
Yeah, it would be the fact that we've gone from this being an opportunity in the past, where it's like that would be a nice thing to have, to it being an obligation, which is it's now a must-have. Frankly, simply because if you don't have a global mindset, you're going to be out of a job. I mean, there's no question, right, that we are actually seeing, you know, all of the localized jobs, all the mechanical jobs, all going to AI, robots, you know, automation. It's inevitable that's going to happen. What is going to be the element that computers cannot do is the context, right? They can do the content, they can't do the context. So it's our ability to join the dots as humans, right, and to find meaning and to you know, create environments which people want to hang out in, and all those other things that computers cannot do, or at least not for a while, which is actually going to ensure that we have job security, right? So you know, being an entrepreneur today, believe it or not, is more secure than being an employee. But that's the shift that's happened just in the last 10 years. So being aware that global mindset is now a necessity. Why? Because if you don't have it, then there's a pretty good chance you're actually going to have a struggle getting income in the future. I think is really important to be thinking about.
I'm going to have to tell my mother that being an entrepreneur is more secure than being an employee. I don't think she would agree with you.
Well, there's the other part of that. Is like if you're the mother of an entrepreneur, that works as well.
This one's an interesting one. You know, you've spent a huge amount of time in South Africa, and even with everything happening in South Africa, you know, you're about to, you know, do a large investment here as well. What is your kind of logic around people living in South Africa and investing globally, and quite frankly, people globally investing in South Africa? And again, it's this whole democratization. But what's your kind of thought process around this?
Back to the whole basis of the fact that you can work anywhere in the world now, and so why not choose a place to live, which actually is a great place to live. I mean, I see myself in the next couple of years, I'm going to be living between probably 3 main countries while I'm traveling around the world. One will be definitely Indonesia with Bali, one will be Thailand, one will be South Africa, and that's simply because why wouldn't you? I mean, it's a beautiful country, and it's got the ability for you to be able to run a business from anywhere while you're there. And probably the most important part of all, which is going to become more and more important, is countries that have the ability for entrepreneurs to be able to make the most impact, to be able to make the biggest difference, are going to be the ones that are going to attract the best entrepreneurs. That's already happening. You're already seeing that with Mark Zuckerberg traveling out to Africa. You're seeing it with, like, you know, Bill Gates traveling out to India. It's going to be the case that all the top entrepreneurs are going to be spending more time in Africa and India and in Asia than they're going to be spending in the West. So we're seeing it happen already. You know, the number of times that, like, you know, the founders of Apple and the founders of Amazon and the founders of Google have been out into, you know, Asia this year has been amazing, right? And that's because of this. So I think it's actually way better right now to be living in a place like South Africa, where you have the opportunity, where you can make an impact, and where, frankly, the cost of living is lower because of the rand, which a lot of people in South Africa thinks is not a good thing. It is a very good thing if you're earning your money from outside of South Africa, and you got living costs inside South Africa, and the ability to make a difference inside South Africa with a currency which is lower. That's a very good thing, right? It's why we're investing in South Africa right now as well. So that's what I'd say share on that one.
Yeah, no, look, I fundamentally say to everyone that, you know, living in Asia, you know, India, you know, Africa is actually, you're part of the future, so people can embrace it and not berate it in many ways. What's the best way to create wealth in a global economy? So, you know, you mentioned already, you've given us the 3 keys here in terms of the social, the intellectual, and most wealthy people are looking at the democratization of capital. If you were to say one thing, what do you think it is that people can focus on to create wealth within this global economy?
I can say that the worst way to create wealth is to do it on your own. So that kind of like leads to what's the best way to create wealth is to get connected into a group of people who already have the mindset of collaboration, where they already understand that by working together, they're going to all be far better off than not. And the second thing, which I think is really important today more than ever, is that you're actually focusing at making an impact, making a difference. And it's kind of interesting because in the past, you know, if you go back 20 years, the idea of an entrepreneur that was actually doing something that was purpose-driven was really looked down on, because, like, your job's not to do that. Your job's to get a return for investors, right? But those were the days when consumers themselves were really just going with whatever was the biggest brand, right? Or whatever was, you know, the cheapest product. Whereas today, consumers are actually far more conscious, and so they're making a lot of purchase decisions based on which is the company that's doing the most meaningful work, or which is the one that I resonate most with. So if you're not actually doing something meaningful, you're not going to get customers. And so, I think we've gone from a world when we used to have entrepreneurs and then social entrepreneurs, which were like the kind of like the outliers, the ones that were actually doing it for purpose as well as profit. Whereas today, every entrepreneur, including all the top ones in the world, the Elon Musks and the Richard Bransons, that they all are social entrepreneurs, but they don't call themselves social entrepreneurs. They still call themselves entrepreneurs, because really, social entrepreneurs have become entrepreneurs. So whereas before you had entrepreneurs and then social entrepreneurs, now we just have entrepreneurs, and the ones who aren't are the anti-social entrepreneurs. It's like the ones that are just like, I'm just going to do it for the money. There's a really great saying which Jeff Bezos has, because by the way, that's the way the money's going as well. Like investment money in Silicon Valley and elsewhere is actually going into the more purpose-driven products as well. And so Jeff Bezos says when he's investing in a company, he will always categorize the founder of the company as either a mercenary or a missionary. And he says the mercenary is the one who's just in it for the money. The missionary is the one who's in it for the purpose and the bigger mission as well. He says, I will always run away from the mercenary. I'll always invest in the missionary. And the irony of it is the missionary actually ends up making a lot more money anyway, because they're doing something purpose-driven, which attracts more people. And that's not just your customers, it includes your talent. If you want the best people in the world, go do something meaningful, and you'll be amazed at how quickly you start attracting them.
Well, it's incredible you say that, because, Dolph Theroux says that saying, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And, you were part of helping us create our whole wealth partner concept. And we've now got 88 wealth partners. I'm very blessed to be part of that incredible community. And equally, when we were on Bali, it was actually in your resort where we came up with the whole concept of the wealth movement, with the purpose, the mission to empower 1 billion people with the use of technology. And I'm not going to talk about that too much now, but that actually literally started around probably you drinking some of that beer in Bali, but it's certainly where it happened with like-minded people. Entrepreneurs make money, but how do you invest? In terms of, you've spoken a bit about diversification, but what are some of the things people should look for?
The most important thing when we're talking about opportunities is they've got to always fit into 5 categories, right? Like because the biggest challenge as you start getting more successful is you get too many opportunities, right? So you've got to choose the right one, because if you don't, you end up with the biggest cost, which is opportunity cost. You're on the wrong opportunity instead of the right one. So the most important thing is that as you start actually getting attraction, as you start getting flow, then the most important thing is following these 5 things, right? So very quickly, the 5 things is, number 1, does it align with your path, which means, like, is it something that's actually going to add value to your life, not just kind of give you a paycheck? Because a number of people I know that have invested in properties or invested in assets that frankly just bore them. I mean, they're there and they're making the money, but they're like, this is not actually as meaningful. So a lot of investors are getting much more into impact investing, or getting to things that align with who they are and what they believe in. So the first one, it better make sure is following your path. The second thing is that it better be something that you can leverage. So when Richard Branson or Warren Buffett or any of the top successful entrepreneurs and investors, when they do invest, they say, am I adding value into this? Because if you're not adding value into the deal, then frankly, you're buying it at retail rate. I mean, like, no one's going to sell you something wholesale unless you're adding some extra value into it. But if you're bringing a brand into it, if you're bringing connections into it, if you're bringing something that you've already built over time, then you're going to find it's much easier to actually get a better rate, a rate that the rest of the market can't get. So most of the margin right now that people make isn't buying at retail and then holding onto it for long enough that it actually changes in price, because who knows if it's going to go up and down. It's going to be much more as a result of buying discounted, because you're actually bringing extra value in some form or another and adding that value. So make sure you're doing that in whatever form and know what that is. The third one is, are you leveraging this asset in some other way? So every time I invest in a property, like if I'm investing in a property, I want to make sure it's either a resort or beach club that is part of my portfolio, that I'm actually going out growing a movement, so that every time someone comes in and goes, oh, look, Roger hasn't got 20 beach clubs now, he's got 25, the whole thing becomes more valuable with every different transaction that you're doing. So make sure you can leverage it. And then the final 2 is, if it fails, which means you don't get the return you wanted to get, are you still motivated if that happens? And you think, well, that'd be weird if I do something and I lose my time and maybe some of my money. Why would I still be motivated? Well, if you've actually learned some really great things through that process, if you've met some amazing people, if new opportunities have shown up which have made you lost more money, then you can actually even lose on some things or make no money on some things, and it still thinks that was worth doing. And that includes starting businesses. People have started businesses which failed, but they say, I'm really happy I did that because it gave me this great knowledge moving forward. But you can figure that out before you start by saying, right, if I go into this and 1 year later it isn't exactly what I wanted, is it still something of real value to me or not, that I would still be motivated to do the investment? If not, don't do it. or else you'll be living in regret because, you know, half the time it's not going to go the way you want it to. And the final thing is, if it succeeds, will it inspire me? It's not good enough to just say, oh, good, if it succeeds, I'll have this as extra money in my bank account. That's not that inspiring. But, like, you know, if it really works, then what is my life going to look like differently? Not just in terms of my financial capital, but in terms of my social and intellectual capital. What would have grown in those with every investment I make? And you'll notice that all the most successful people in the world, they're always thinking of these two much more than they're thinking of the asset itself, because they realize their biggest asset is themselves. So anything they're doing better give them a return on themselves and their own skill sets and track record as well.
So Roger, I'm conscious of time here. I've got a couple more questions, but do you mind if we do them kind of popcorn style? So literally 30 seconds, we'll just bang through it. Because I'll tell you why, I'm aware that it's moving on to 2 a.m. your time, and I want to make sure we get to talking about the resort and stuff. So where do you see opportunity around the world, like in terms of, you know, one thing where you see opportunity?
Everywhere. Or another way to say everywhere is exactly where you are, right? So so don't go hunting for it. It's there. It's just most people can't even see the opportunities right in front of them.
Okay, what would you recommend that people do based on everything you see going on? So obviously different people in different stages of life, live in different countries, but what do you think that they should focus on?
Spend less time thinking and more time taking action. Like, number of procrastination that actually happens, and then the whole world changes by the time you actually decide to do something, and then what you were about to do is now gone out of date.
I love that one. So, you know, I grew up in South Africa, and you know, when you grew up here, everyone in Gauteng told you that they had a game reserve. I always used to laugh because, you know, some people had a little Impala with a hut, and others had a real game reserve. And I'll never forget, you know, when I first met Henny, you know, you never quite knew when people said, "Come to my game reserve." You didn't know what to expect, you know. And I remember arriving at his game reserve, and it had an airstrip, and you know, could sleep 26 people. I was like, okay, right, this is a proper game reserve, you know. But you know, my question number 13, what are your thoughts? And you've spoken about this whole democratization, but what are your thoughts now that everyone has access to opportunities which previously were only available to the top 1%? You know, buying a game reserve was just never in people's mindset, other than these tiny little fractional things with an Impala on it. But really, I mean, it's really exciting now what people have access to that they never did in the past.
Yeah, my thought on it, I mean, is that the reality is that that's the case. But my thought on it is that most people aren't actually taking those opportunities because there's a belief gap. They don't actually even believe it's even possible. So even though people say, yeah, you can do this, they don't even take the step to then do it, and then they miss out. Right? There's no question that happens. You know, I got my son trading when he was like 8 years old, right? And just so he really started understanding money and understanding investments. And I said, okay, you know, take some of your pocket money, you know, take some of the earnings from your work, from the things you do in the summer, and invest in some shares, see what happens. And he says, what should I invest in? I say, you invest in the stuff that you're actually using. So he's using Sony PlayStation, you know, he was using Apple, so he bought some shares in Sony, bought some shares in Apple. And the biggest shift about that wasn't just that he ended up basically buying Apple when it was a 20th of the value it is today, but the fact that, you know, when he went to school, he's like, oh, this is my company, I own this company, because he then had an ownership mindset. And when you think about that you actually have the ability to own anything at any level, if you're actually willing to do it, it then changes your mindset and belief about yourself as to what's possible as well.
That's incredible. I mean, just on your son, I actually was talking to someone just today about your son. I remember 2 years ago, he crowdfunded his company, and I think it was $40,000 or $45,000 he raised.
Yeah, that's right. When he was 16 years old, that was his school project. I said, he said, is this a good project? And I said, I don't know, ask the market. So he put it on Indiegogo. He was like making these blocks, building blocks, and that was the result of it, which was very cool.
I must admit, I use that all the time. Whenever anyone tells me they can't get the money, I'm like, whatever, dude. A 16-year-old got $45,000. What can people do to learn and partner with wealthy people? You know, so there's Genius U. There's your whole kind of e-resorts. There's coming to your events. You've got your crystal circles, etc. But you know, what can people do more to learn and partner with? And by wealthy, I don't necessarily mean people with money. I mean wealthy in mindset.
Yeah. I mean, so I'm definitely getting to the right network in some way. You know, you've got your wealth partners. We've created a group called Impact Investors. We're actually running an Impact Investors retreat at our resort in July in South Africa, right? So we meet up regularly, and we all share, as you know, because you shared on the last one, that when you're actually sharing across all asset classes, whether it's how to invest in business, how to invest in properties, how to set up nonprofits, like doing all of those things from an impact point of view, it's amazing the kind of people that show up, because people who actually have money are searching for that already. They're trying to figure out, like, what's a way to do this smarter and a way to do this in a more meaningful way as well. So find groups like that, join those groups, so that you're not trying to figure it out for yourself.
Yeah, I must admit, I would highly recommend it. I really enjoyed that that couple of days in Tau. So the last question, where do you see the future of business and investing in 10 years? So 2017, so that's 2027 plus minus.
We're going to live in a very, very different world. I think at that time, digital currencies are going to be the main means of exchange. I think that all of the regulations that we have at the moment will disappear with the likes of blockchain, and the fact that trust will be fully distributed. So we're not seeing that our ability to grow is only as good as our relationship with our bank manager. I mean, that's all going to disappear. Banks and governments themselves, I think, will look very, very different from what they look like right now. So the most important thing you can invest in today is your own education, because by just being able to understand how to surf those waves, expect everything to change, because it will. We'll have a very different education system in 10 years. We'll have a very different even connectivity. We won't have mobile phones most likely. It's all going to be via, augmented reality or virtual reality, and just the whole world will be very, very different from what it is today. And that means that the competitiveness of people who are going to be able to actually flow their money into any asset anywhere will be at the speed of the zeros and ones, right? And because of that, understanding and being on the front of the wave is going to be more important than ever.
Yeah, no, look, if some of that stuff didn't make any sense to people, please go along to those events that Roger's hosting. I think he said in December here in South Africa, but just go on the website. They've got them all around the world. I'm actually doing something. We've got a guy, Willem van der Post, later this month also, that's talking around some of those technologies, and really, it's really important that people understand them, because they're going to have a material impact on everyone's life. So I wanted to kind of get to the property side, and it's interesting because 2 years ago I was there in Bali, and you were helping me, coaching me with the business and how to set it up and how to be global, and even in the crowdfunding space. And at the property, when one looks at property, it's one of the oldest, most archaic, inefficient, basically asset classes on the planet. And when the investor invests, there's fees all the way through the process. There's no trust. There's no transparency. And quite frankly, when one thinks of a game reserve, people don't even consider it. You've mentioned it. They wouldn't even consider it to be a possibility, because the technology wasn't there, and the access is just far too much. It's too expensive. They don't have the knowledge, and they don't even get access to it. And for me, whether you look at a game reserve, or whether you look at the tallest building in Cape Town, or whether you look at a medical building in America, most people are stuck in country. If they're from Joburg, they invest in Joburg. If they're from Cape Town, they invest in Cape Town. If they're from Brisbane, they invest in Brisbane. And the reason is that it's so difficult. The barriers to entry are so high in the old traditional methodology. They don't have access to the good quality opportunities. And then, when you start to take into account the legal, the trust, the partners, and the tax, it just becomes almost impossible. And because of this really old, archaic $13 trillion industry, what you have found is that whenever technology comes to a space, it has a massive impact on disrupting that space. It does three things. It cuts the costs, it cuts out the middleman, and it increases the trust, the transparency, and the accessibility. And so you can see there's a whole bunch of platforms that are around the world, but what they've done is that they focus just in one area for one market and one population. And right from the start, Roger's helped me build Wealth Migrate and be part of the whole process. And we've always thought globally. I'll never forget, even when I was in America, and we were thinking, oh, we want to be in America more. And Roger was, go to China, go to China, go be the Alibaba, stop trying to be the eBay and the Amazon, and we did back in 2016. And really, we asked ourselves, how do we make global real estate easy? And what's being done now is that what used to take weeks, years, literally for people, now they can do it in a couple of minutes. They can sit there, they can focus on creating true global wealth, they can focus on quality partners, the best opportunities, things like even tonight, what we're talking about. This was never available even a year ago. And the best part for me is that people can truly now participate with as little as $1,000. And even in South Africa now, it can be as little as 1,000 Rand. In the past, it was all about hassles and management issues and complex global tax structures. But now they can just focus on the best returns in the global market. And I think what's really important is that if I just show people here very quickly, because I'm a big believer that it's easy to put nice PowerPoints together. But if I just log in quickly into the platform here, and you're literally, sorry, it's giving 2 seconds here. I'm just going to log in for you. And I actually just want to give people a feeling, because what Roger's going to talk about now is the opportunity to be able to participate in these e-resorts. And you know, one of the first ones is here in South Africa. They've already got one in Bali, and he's already mentioned tonight 25. And for me, it's the best way to describe it. It's like being able to play global Monopoly. You know, this is my portfolio. You're seeing it live. I'm on 4 different continents. If I go into my funded investments, you'll see that it's a breakdown between residential and commercial. If I click on any one of these, I can go into all the detail of the rent rolls and the distributions and all the financials with regards to the projects. I no longer have to worry. It's interesting, actually. I found out yesterday, you know, one of my bank cards in London has, both of them have actually expired. And, you know, trying to keep my bloody bank accounts between England, Australia, America, South Africa, China is so difficult. And now you can just manage the wallets in one place. And then the best part for me is, from a security perspective, is that it's all listed on a regulated exchange, and people can go in, they can see everything, they've got the tracking number. If they want to, they can click on, you've spoken about blockchain, I'm not going to go into that tonight, but it's all listed and on the blockchain. And why this is so important is that this really brings me to a massive opportunity. And just before I share that opportunity, you know, we've also got a competition running at the moment. And the reason we're doing this, and a lot of people say, you know, where's the catch? And the catch is that Uber used to give away free rides, because once you tested an Uber, you'd never go in a yellow taxi again. And our catch is that if you literally log on our platform, you'll go in the draw to win an apartment in the tallest building in Cape Town. And equally, if you share it with your friends, you get extra draws on every single one. So what Roger's about to share with you, there's huge incentive just to go on the platform, even just to be able to get in the draw. But the thing that I'm super excited about is that we spoke literally 2 years ago, where I remember Roger sharing the vision. He had Bali. He was looking at getting a Big 5 game reserve in South Africa, getting resorts in Hawaii. I'll never forget, Roger. And, you know, some people often think that people like yourself are creators, quite frankly, but also futurists. It's all pipe dreams and it's never going to happen. And I admit that there are many people out there in the world that do a lot of talking. But, you know, I got invited in November to come and actually see this. And this was the very first, my understanding was your very first impact investors gathering. Was that not right?
That's right, yeah.
You know, it was really, really dry. It was right in the middle of summer. And I literally, you know, got to spend, I think there were, I can't remember the number, but 20, 25 people. And it was absolutely phenomenal. People from all over the world had flown in: Australia, Asia, England, America. I think there was an American. I mean, this was my room. You know, this was the waterhole right outside my room, which, you know, it's very, very dry at the time. But also it meant all the animals came here. I literally sat on my balcony and literally looked at, I mean, this was the morning, the rhinos coming down to drink and play in the mud. And I'm actually showing you not kind of professional photographs, because these are literally photos I took off my cell phone. Here the elephants are. These are the resorts here. This was a panoramic. We were out for a drive. That's actually the resort there, all around the waterhole. And you know, this was the sunset. We were just having literally sundowners. This was the crew, so maybe not 25, probably 15 maybe, where we went out in 2 game vehicles. And it just, the most incredible, I mean, for me, I've never seen so many elephants in all my life. I can't remember. I've got videos that I can share with people if they want. I mean, this was literally so this is the resort here. You can see the resort huts around the water pool and all these elephants and everything else. And that's a crocodile. We were playing a game. Sandra was making us play games to have silly selfies with wild animals, if you remember. But I mean, these are all just pictures of the animals. So I'm going to get off the animals. But really, what amazed me was that my whole life I've only ever heard about the wealthiest of the wealthy being able to get access to a game reserve, and particularly to a Big 5. I mean, that time we saw lions, we saw elephants, we saw rhinos, and I mean, we even saw wild dogs and et cetera, hyena. And I think what's important is that I really wanted to hand over to you here, because what you and Michiel and your team and our team have done is really, for me, quite exciting. You know, not only can people now participate in a Big 5 game reserve from as little as $1,000, but more importantly, and I want to be very clear, if you've been listening to what you've been learning tonight, more importantly, you're actually plugging into a network and one of those learning networks. So you not only are in an environment that is beautiful and you know, with the Big Five, which is a World Heritage, but equally you're around amazing people. And I wanted to, I think you said you had some slides to share. Can I swap screens with you, and you can actually share with people and just explain to people what it is that was a dream years ago and is now a reality to people?
Yeah, I'm just going to ask with the slide you got on here, if people are interested in what I'm about to share, are you going to like drop a link to them or something which allows anyone who's listening to basically go and just say you're interested in this, because there's something happening in this next week which I'm going to share in a moment that I'm sure for many of you you'll find very interesting. So is there going to be a link or something you're going to drop in, right?
So basically, if you're in Wealth Migrate and you just log in, you'll see there the investments coming soon, and literally if you click on it, it'll go to the screen that I was sharing passively on the PowerPoint, so you should be able to see it coming up now on your screen. And what Roger is talking about is that you can literally click on this add to watch list, which means that you'll go in the, you know, effectively, A, you'll be updated, and B, you'll be in the queue, if you want to call it that, because you know if there's more demand than there is supply, then it really is first come first serve in terms of, that's the way we do it from a watch list perspective. So again, just to confirm, I'll put the link in. It's just wealthmigrate.com. You go in, you look for the entrepreneur resorts, this picture of the elephants, and you can click on the watch list right here. But I'm going to share over to yourself.
Okay, all right. So I'll hand over, and I'm conscious of time, and I know probably people think this is an hour course. So I really hope everyone who's been listening got some great value just from what we actually shared. And then give me 5 minutes, and I will aim to make the next 5 minutes as valuable as the whole course so far. Can you see my screen okay, Scott? Is it showing up?
Yeah, perfect. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, great. So what I'm sharing here is first of all, I want to just start with the fact that what we're actually doing at the moment is very linked to what I was talking to earlier about the likes of WeWork. Has WeWork been able to be just like co-working spaces be worth now $20 billion? And the reason is because they've got a membership program where they have a captive audience of entrepreneurs that actually want to use their offices, so they can actually go in and get a much higher yield from the way they've got that structured than if the office just goes out and leases to someone else. So what we have done within Entrepreneur Resorts, which is our resort and beach club company, is create a membership program for our 600,000, soon to be 1 million entrepreneurs, where we run events. So imagine something like like the resort that that I'll show you in a moment. You're always going to have seasonality, right? That's just the way that game lodges work. Whereas with us, we can actually be running events all through the year with our entrepreneurs, where they're actually running incubators and so on. Similarly, with our beach club, we do exactly the same thing, where we actually have co-working on the beach club, as well as co-working tends to be busy outside of lunch and dinner, whereas beach clubs tend to be busy at lunch and dinner. So you put the two together, you get a far, far better program. So what we're doing is we're basically creating liquidity by bringing together a whole group of resorts and beach clubs, and we are listing the company. We've got an IPO that happens next week. It's listing on the Tropex Stock Exchange in Seychelles. We are listing at a valuation of around about $12 million. We have got to start with our resort in Bali, and also at the same time our beach club in Bali, which is this beach club here. And what we're doing is acquiring Tau Game Lodge, which is in South Africa, on a 30-year lease. So that basically we are going to be running that, and it's already profitable, but we're going to be adding another $1.5 million in revenues and $500,000 in profit on top of it with our model, right? So basically we know we can actually up the value of an investment off the back of that. We're running the IPO in such a way that people can invest like $1,000 in and grow from there. And we've got our planning of how we're going to then acquire more beach clubs and more resorts, with 50 beach clubs and 5 resorts over the next 5 years. So if you happen to be someone who likes the idea of supporting the entrepreneur movement, who has $1,000 or more that you want to invest in something, then this could be a way to get involved in something which is very fast growing. And again, coming back to this, we know our forecast of what we want to be doing with our share price and growing is far in excess of what you can do with a property. But that's because we've actually got an entire group of properties, and we're actually building the brand and the membership across all of it as well. So every one of the resorts, every one of the beach clubs, we have a model around it. We have the Tropex IPO that is happening next Wednesday. We're already 2 million out of the 3 million we want to raise subscribed. So we're already 2/3 there, and we haven't even started the IPO yet. So I think we're going to be very oversubscribed once it starts. We have a whole structure of how we're going to develop and grow it. the size of the market just keeps on growing. So no one else is doing what we're doing right now. It's kind of interesting because, like, you know, the whole Richard Branson story and Necker Island was one of the inspirations for this, because he's really created what would probably be the first entrepreneur resort on Necker. We're now replicating that all over the world, and then working in partnership with organizations like Necker. And we have a really solid team of people that have come together to actually make all of this work. Tau Game Lodge is the first of our South African acquisitions. We've actually got on here, just to give an idea, this is our Vision Villas retreat, which is our Asia One. This is what our beach club is like. We've got activities happening pretty much every day here, really super high reviews on what we're doing, and every day there's events, activities going on. This is the Tau Game Lodge, which is in Madikwe, and it's the biggest of the lodges in Madikwe. You saw some of it. This is when it's a bit greener. But we're going to, like I said, in July, we're going to be running our event as well. Yeah. So anyway, so that's all I wanted to share at this point, the fact that we are doing that it is happening, that if you are used to investing on Wealth Migrate or you're just getting started, the difference of this compared to the property investments is you're effectively investing in the entire group of, and you've got shares that you can actually, after you bought, you can sell whenever you want them, so you've got full liquidity on those shares, but you're really benefiting by being a shareholder in a fast-growing company, which is all property-based, and which is allowing us to really build a home for the entrepreneur movement, which for me is the most exciting part of this.
So Roger, just a question from my side is that if someone invests, just for simple terms, keep it $1,000 for now, you've got Bali and you've got Tau, and there's the intention obviously to grow the resorts. You mentioned 25 plus. How do they actually get to participate in all of it? Because they're effectively investing in the company that's owning all the resorts. So effectively, it's you're investing across multiple resorts with Tau.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. You're investing in the holding company, so every other resort that we have is all sitting under the holding company as well. You know, we're basically on each case, whether it's through license, whether it's through issuing more shares to acquire a new property. You know, we are still, and whether it's a freehold property, whether it's leasehold property, is ensuring we're doing it where we're going to generate really great cash flow off the back of it as well. So you're definitely benefiting from all of that. But there's extra benefits as well, which is what I'm most interested in, is that we want to do more than just have people investing who are just waiting for a return on their money. What we're also doing is making sure everyone who comes on board, you know, gets 20% off, you know, everything that that they buy or that they book, you know, at any of our resorts and their beach clubs. So effectively, you're part of a global traveling club where everywhere you go, you're going to be able to meet up with entrepreneurs. You're going to be able to meet up, you know, come to any of the events that are taking place there as well. So there's that's going on. And there's another part, which is that we do have levels. So while you can just invest 1,000, if someone invests 10,000 or more, they're actually getting a 2-week accelerator program at one of our accelerator retreats that we have. And we kind of like to explain more about that when we actually do the launch. If they're at $25,000 or more, then they join our Impact Investor Circle and get invited in with all our investors that are all investing 25, 50, 100,000 or more in investments. And so getting to know each other as well. And we're going to take the ones that are the highest contributors towards the actual funding, and we're going to be bringing them out complimentary to our resort for our Impact Investor Retreat. So, you know, it's more than just the fact that you're actually using that money to get a return. You're actually at the same time being able to now connect up with other great people within our network all around the world as well.
Perfect. So I just wanted to show people here that that document you were just showing people. If I go back to hang on, if I go back to the page here, which is where you got the entrepreneur resorts, and if you go to the overview, that it's literally sitting there under the pitch deck, so people can just click on it, and then effectively you'll just get access to the PDF that Roger was showing you there. So just to conclude out, and before, I think I'm conscious very much of the time, but for those of you who haven't heard from Roger or even from Wealth Migrate before, we do now have investors from 89 different countries. Users from 89 countries, investors from 18 different countries. We have had 55 million go through the platform now, about 870 transactions. And one of the things that I'm really excited about is that we've had more than 70% of our investors have actually reinvested. Last year in November, we actually won a KPMG Global FinTech Top 50 award. We were the only company in Africa to be part of that, and we were also part of the African FinTech Top 3 companies. At a board level, we've really aimed to have some of the leaders when it comes to both marketplace and platform. On the compliance side, Dolph de Roos on the education side, Henny and Peter very much on the real estate side, and then some of the advisors, and Roger's been very kind and integral, right through that process. And I think also just to let people know, if they do want more information, Michiel and the team are really the guys that understand this in terms of the opportunity. We do have live events around South Africa. We're doing a roadshow on the 25th of May, where in the morning we're going to be talking all about the real estate opportunities. So whether you're interested in Tau or something in Cape Town or something in America, or quite frankly, what I love most now is that you can do it all. We're going to have a session in the morning. In the afternoon, we're going to be looking at technology and how it's disrupting the $13 trillion real estate industry. We've got a guest speaker there, Willem van der Post, that was the ex-Deloitte's partner that really headed up the whole exponential technology space. And then for our wealth partners, we've got a dinner, an exclusive dinner in the evening. And so in Joburg, that's on the 25th of May. In KZN, it's on the 30th of May. And in Cape Town, it's on the 1st of June. So I'd really recommend that if people want more information, if they really want to sit down with some of our team guys and be able to understand it, we can really go through it. And then we've got a whole wealth partner weekend on the 23rd to the 26th of June. We'll be going into this, and you actually spoke about the noughts and ones earlier, Roger, around the, how this whole 60s of disruption, makes such an impact, and why people can now invest in entrepreneurial resorts, as an example, from as little as $1,000. And really, for me, the next steps for everyone online is go online and register tonight. You literally go in the draw to win the apartment, and equally go and get on that watch list for this entrepreneur resorts. I know that Roger has been reaching out to his community. Obviously I was there back in even November, and while they've been getting this process, getting it set up. But when is the IPO due to go live? I know it's next week, Roger, but do we have an actual date?
Yeah, it looks like it's going to be Wednesday that it will be going live. So at that point, and I think anyone who goes in now and says they're interested, they'll be notified at that point as well.
Great. So guys, go online. You'll get access to all these other things in terms of just white papers and my book and opportunities. But I really think from my perspective, I really wanted to just say to people, get started on your investment journey. And one of the things that I'm so excited with what Roger's doing with the whole entrepreneur network that they've got, and the Genius U and this Impact Investors, is that really tying together entrepreneurship and lifestyle and real estate investment is truly exciting. And it really allows people to have that global mindset and that global citizenship that we spoke about. I ask you the question, what business are you in today? Where are you going to be in 3 years? Where are you going to be in 10 years? And what innovation, what is innovation doing in your life, in your investing, and in your business? And when tonight is very much part of two things. Not only is there the entrepreneurship network that Roger's talking about, but equally the ability to participate in the underlying real estate deals. And so, really Roger has helped us over the last 7 years really digitize what was ostensibly a property company. And my question to all of you is, how are you digitizing your life? How are you proofing your life? And this entrepreneur resorts, for me, is a fantastic way to get into that community. And for us, in terms of what we're trying to do with the platform, is to allow you the ability to do the smart investing, but literally, from your pocket, giving access to absolutely everyone. $1,000 is not a lot of money now to be able to participate in a global IPO that is globally going to be real estate resorts all over the world. But what I love most is tying together like-minded entrepreneurs. And so that's all from my side. There are just a couple of questions here, Roger, if you don't mind, just for 5 minutes quickly, just to answer them quickly. So, boom, 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 boom. So Tony Shea says, being a global citizen surely means more immigration and tax authority red tape, especially in the light of money laundering and terrorism. Globalization also seems to be reversing. What are your thoughts in this regard? Are you not viewed by authorities with suspicion when entering and investing in different countries? It's an interesting question.
The answer is no. I don't think you'll find anyone who's actually globally traveling who has that challenge in terms of suspicion. So I can't answer it more than that. I mean, give it a go. You'll find you don't have people in other countries who are suspicious. If you've got partners in different countries, there's no one in South Africa suspicious about us coming in and and buying the lease on the. I mean, in fact, people are happy that we're coming in and investing. So it's all about your mindset on how you're looking at it.
Yeah, I must admit, I started investing internationally at 22. It was the best thing I ever did. So I highly, highly recommend it. Bradley said something here which is pretty interesting. He says, "Can't believe my eyes. I've been going to Tau Game Reserve Madikwe religiously 3 times a year without fail since 1997. My father actually tried to buy Tau prior to moving to and beyond, and it was sold to an Australian. I'm in." So yeah, Bradley's got value out of tonight. Amanda, who is in Switzerland, is saying, "Incredible, thank you to you both." And George says, "I'd be interested in hearing more about these global resorts." So George, please go online and you can actually click on the on the watch list, and also that whole document is actually there in terms of reading all about it and everything else. And obviously, once the IPO, it's quite hard to release information pre-IPO for obvious reasons. Once the IPO is done, then we can, what's it? I can't speak. It's so late. Populate it with actually the numbers and everything else. You'll notice there's not too many returns, etc., because it's only legally allowed to do that once it actually IPOs in terms of where we're actually at. So there's a lot of people saying they're in. So fantastic, Roger. I think you've got a whole new group of people that are participating. I'm certainly in. I've been to Tau. I've been to Bali. I've been part of your ecosystem, or your movement, as you call it, since 2010, and it's been one of the most valuable things that's ever happened to me in my life. And guys, I can't recommend it more highly. I've personally spoken a few times at some of Roger's events with no endorsement or any upside for me, but purely actually just to thank Roger for the tremendous impact that he's had in my life, and subsequently, quite frankly, in all of your lives, because otherwise we wouldn't have Wealth Migrate. So, but yeah, so I highly recommend it. And really, for me, now that you can participate with as little as $1,000, there's really not a lot of risk for people to join. And I'm sure, knowing Roger and knowing kind of how we worked at Wealth Migrate, it'll also be far more valuable for the first 100 people that are involved than one day when there's 1,000